Hello, BookTube, and this is week 19 and 20 of Future History Project, and we've read The Robots of Dawn. Week 20 has just expired, so we're now I'm finally caught up. Now, this was the third robot novel that Isaac Asimov wrote, and it was published in 1983 in the US and 1984 in the UK. Now, it follows on from The Naked Sun to a certain extent, and novel-wise, but interspersed between the two was a short story, Mirror Image, which we've already dealt with. But at the end of The Naked Sun, Elijah Bailey had asked and wanted to go to Aurora. That was the first of the spacer worlds, the outer worlds that was colonized, and it's where Daniel is from, and where Dr. Hans Fastloff, if that's the pronunciation, was from, and he had met Fastloff on Earth in the Caves of Steel. And he's now Elijah has started a movement to get people accustomed to the outside because of what is called claustrophilia. It's the opposite of claustrophobia. It's wanting enclosed spaces, and it harkens back to Asimov felt he loved enclosed spaces, but that's where on Earth the enclosed cities, nobody goes outside, so there's a fear of agoraphobia to go outside. But Elijah knows that in order for Earth people to begin again and establish themselves on other worlds and colonize other worlds, they have to get used to being outside again. So he has started a movement for himself and his son and others to go outside several times a week. And because he's been his social level has been increased because he went to Solaria and was successful, he has more free time and he's given a little more leeway. So he's in the midst of doing this, but he gets called back in and he's on his day off. And the government wants him to go to Aurora. They refused before, but now he's been asked for. And again, he has no choice but to go. And it's Dr. Hans Fastloff that has requested him because he's in trouble. One of his, there were two prototype robots, Daniel and Jandar, that were humaniform. Jandar was found scrambled. And there's a political situation where Fastloff wants Earthmen to colonize the rest of the galaxy. And there's another group called Globalists on Aurora that only want Aurorans to populate, to expand into the universe. And so he has to go because this could kill the career and of Fastloff and Earth's basically chance of leaving the Earth, and it would isolate the Earth even more. So Elijah goes, and he's met on the spaceship by Daniel, so he's very glad of that, and another robot, not a humaniform robot, but Giscard, an old retainer of Fastloff. And he learns that, yeah, Jandar was his positronic brain was scrambled. And Fastloff says he's the only one that had the knowledge to do this. No one else, no roboticist, had the knowledge to do this. So, uh, the reason why it's so detrimental is if the other side is saying that he did it. He denies doing it. He thinks it's a chance happening, like one in a million chance, that the positronic pathways got corrupted. The other side, the globalists, are saying he did this purposely. Now, what the globalists want is, as I say, the Aurorans to populate and expand into the rest of the universe. Now, here it gets a little iffy for story-wise. I don't know if Asimov really thought this out too much, because it didn't quite hold together for me. The globalists want to have humaniform robots populate and create a society on other worlds for then Aurorans to step into. I don't quite understand why they need to be humaniform. Like, I can understand that they say that it's only them that could create the society, but the thing is, it's human society that they want. Unless that it's like, unless I missed the part that they were happy that Aurorans stay on Aurora, humans, and Aurorans as humaniform robots populate the rest of the universe, but I don't quite think that's what was meant. So I couldn't quite understand why they needed humaniform. They just give the instructions to the other robots to build, to terraform if needed, or change everything and have buildings and cities ready for Aurorans or other humans just to sort of walk in and start living. So that seemed a little iffy to me in the story, but okay, fine. I put that aside and accepted it and went along. Sort of a willing suspension of disbelief. So this is the situation, and Elijah is not happy about this because he feels that it's an impossible task. And Jandar was sort of loaned out to Gladia, who he met on the in the Naked Sun, and she moved to Aurora, and she was in charge of Jandar, the other humaniform robot, whose brain was scrambled. Now, she considered him a husband, not in a legal sense, but in every other sense. And Auroran society, unlike the society where she was from, do live together, and they use sort of sex as a recreational thing, not only just for procreation. And she has never experienced this, and she dabbled with other Aurorans, but was not happy, and until she had Jandar. So Jandar was the surrogate human for her, for sex. And she's quite distraught with this. But Elijah, he learns this aspect, and he's a bit, in some ways, a bit shocked, I guess, but he realizes that, the society is very, very different from Earth society, and the morals are different. And he learns a little bit more occasionally as he goes along, but he's hampered by not knowing just basic things of Auroran society. And he learns by default and accident and pitfall of simple things. So he winds up interviewing several people, and the person who is the opposition, the globalists, It's another roboticist who wants to, get the secret for humaniform robots, and he wants to start production so they can then move to colonizing the rest of the galaxy. So he's a political enemy of Dr. Fasloff. I won't go into the details of how or what happened in the solution because it is a mystery, and I don't like. I don't mind spoiling other stories, but I don't like spoiling mysteries, and this is a mystery even so. But Elijah is successful, and there's some very interesting things in this novel because it's an example of Isaac Asimov writing these stories, all these stories without a sort of plan, a grand plan. We've discussed this before. No grand plan as it goes on. And then in the 80s, he starts tying these things together. The robot stories to the Empire stories, and the Empire stories to the Foundation stories. And he does that in this one, and kind of interestingly. There are references to a few stories. There's reference to Susan Calvin. And it's interesting because it's like Elijah Bailey does not know who Susan Calvin was. She is sort of held up and is revered through the spacer worlds. And one story, especially Dr. Fasloff likes, is the liar story, where the robot there was a problem with his or an accident in his programming, and he was able to read minds, and Susan Calvin, it caused problems, and then it actually was a first law problem, and she scrambled the mind of the robot. Now, Dr. Fasloff likes this story, and he sort of saying it's a legend, it's a myth, which I thought was kind of interesting. And another one is Andrew Martin, the Bicentennial Man, or the Positronic Man in the novel. And again, it's considered sort of apocryphal, not apocryphal so much, but a myth, a legend. But Giscard, Fasloff had a daughter, and she liked this story, and Giscard was her sort of favorite robot, and she tinkered, and she became a roboticist, and she would program him at times. You might see where this is going. But anyway, he calls her Little Miss, as Andrew Martin calls the character, the youngest daughter in Bicentennial Man, Little Miss. And he's been around for quite a while, and but it's interesting. It's these things that they're classing as legend, but there is the legend part to it, the myth part, but also there's some truth to it. And that's an interesting thing that he's seeding into these stories where, stuff doesn't quite fit in, chronologically, or, doesn't fit in because it's like they're contradictions. But are they contradictions because it is a mythical story, a legendary story? Because it's the idea, it's the legend part, it's the meaning of it, which is part of the future history rather than the events. Now, that's easy to do, I suppose you could say, because he's trying to fit it all in and shoehorn it in with it, and it's an easy out because this contradicts. Well, it doesn't contradict because X, Y, and Z. So it's an easy way, but it also makes it an interesting way to look at these stories rather than everything plotted out perfectly. It's just a different way of doing it, and I personally accept this, and I think that can be interesting because it makes you think a little more of what is, legendary, what is mythical, and what is um, accurate, in the storyline. So I find that quite interesting. But also too, he's prequeling here stuff from Foundation. Dr. Fastlov talks to Elijah about a theory that robots have the 3 laws of robotics that govern them, and things can be predictable with robots. And he thinks that can be done with humans as well. And this is why he created a humaniform robot, and he calls his science psychohistory. And that sounds familiar, doesn't it, if you know the Foundation stories? I won't get into too much detail with that, because for those that have not read those in the past, but just keep these things in mind if you haven't, of the psychohistory. And also too, it was a bit of a gimmick, like he sort of convenient to bring in the liar story of a robot that can read minds. Well, we got Giscard, who can read minds. And it was by the fiddling of his programming by Fastlov's daughter that created this. And he not only can read minds, he can tweak things or push people into thinking things, but because of his first law, he doesn't do it too much, and there's certain things he still follows the first law for, and he won't push too far because he thinks it could harm humans and humanity. But he will tweak things, he will nudge. And he nudged Fastlov to bring Elijah there, because he wanted to meet Elijah. He thinks that Earthmen should be the ones that populate the Earth, not sort of the decadent in some ways, moribund in many other ways spacers. Even though they live for 2-3 times as long as humans, but they've sort of lost their way. That's sort of the consensus in these stories. They've lost their way, and I think Asimov was showing that with the sort of lax morals and things like that, and also too where. Because they live so long, like 3.5 centuries, scientists will work on their own. They won't share information for the most part, because they will spend the time to figure it out. Meanwhile, progress could be made much quicker if they pooled the information and they worked together. But they're afraid of the Earth people being like ants and breeding like rabbits and taking over the universe. With their short lives, and because they sort of have this burning urge to do because of the short lives, rather than individualism and a slower process. But Giscard thinks that is the way it should be, and he's guiding things. He's guided not only others on the planet, the leader of their legislature. He's tweaked a little bit, and he's helped tweak Elijah a little bit too, and he's going to do his best to make sure that they will eventually give aid to Earth and have them, leave the Earth and explore and colonize other planets. So he's setting this up, and it's also setting it up for Daniel, but we'll see that later. But it's a good story. As I say, there are a few faults with it. Like I say, the aspect of them wanting to just have humaniform robots to colonize and create the society, I didn't quite get that. I don't think it was explained that well, or I missed it, because I've read this a couple times now, and I just don't think that part holds water that well. So yeah. Anyway, but it's good, and the writing's good. The story is very meandering. The when Elijah is asking these questions and stuff like that, it seems simplistic and doesn't really get anywhere. But it is for the story, and I think he is infusing these things in to try to get the reader to realize, and for Elijah to realize, that these spacers, even though they're more intelligent, they're more powerful, more long lived, but they're stagnating, and they're lacking in morals in many ways. I think that's what we're trying to show, and because of that, they will in the end just sort of disappear. They will burn out, and Giscard knows this as well. So to me, it was a very, very good story, and it's about twice as long, almost twice as long as it's about the length of Cave of Steel and the Naked Sun. The next one, the fourth robot story novel, is Robots and Empire. Now, that is also long as well, but we won't be getting to that for quite a while. There's a lot of other material that was written by other writers before we get to that. But yeah, it fits in, I think, really well with the future history timeline, and he is, like I say, starting to pull the things together, because it clearly shows that Susan Calvin is part of the future history because of the connections now with everything. And it also, as I said, it does talk a little bit about the aspect of stories contradicting themselves, or the potential for that. You can make an argument of why there's contradictions there, or potentially why, which then creates discussion, which I think is neat, and it's a good way to do it. Another thing, a subscriber and a reader of the Future History asked about the thing that he was missing, like Asimov was missing, was the time dilation with him, buzzing around and going to places. Well, that doesn't have a bearing in these stories, because the travel is through hyperspace, and he has established it partially in more detail in Nemesis, and there will be more detail in future in some of the Foundation ones, where through hyperspace it's instantaneous travel. There's no time dilation regardless of the distance that you go, but there will be several jumps, hyperspace jumps, and the time that it takes to get from point A to point B is sort of the jump point, and the entry point and the exit point to where you're going. That is the thing that will take up time, but that is universal time. It's no slower, no faster than what is happening in the universe. And that is convention. It's a plot device, because if you do have faster than light travel, FTL, then you've got to deal with this somehow. You either have to have the time dilation, or you have to figure out another way of traveling that does not have time dilation. And so, if I remember correctly, it was back in the early 30s. It was John W. Campbell who I think started this thing about hyperspace, that it sidesteps the time dilation issue. Now, I know people have said, and I've read stuff before saying, well, it's not It's not scientifically possible. You can't go faster than the speed of light, blah, blah, blah. But this is showing that there's something else that we haven't even, like, within the storylines, it's things that have been discovered that humans never knew about. So therefore, it does allow that because of X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, it's hard to argue against that, because before people would say that it's impossible to do X, Y, and Z, lighter than air travel and stuff like that. But then once you learn something else, it builds on, and you do find it. So to me, that works. Again, it's part of the willing suspension of disbelief and following along in the story, because if you accept positronic brains, why not this? Because otherwise he would have to change. He would have to work in the time dilation, and that can work. And you do see that in stories and novels where the time dilation is the issue. But if you don't want that, hyperspace is the trope, I guess, or the gimmick, the plot gimmick that allows you to do that. And within the stories, to me, it works. And as I say, there will be more about this later on in the Foundation stories, like a little bit. So you got to sort of piece it together. It started a little bit in some of the robot stories where they're doing it, but then especially in Nemesis, where they figured out, hyperspatial travel. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Next week is week 21, and we will be reading the first two of the Robot City novels. They're short. They're like the Robots in Time, as I've mentioned, and there's 6 of them, so we'll be reading those for 3 weeks. But there's about 10 weeks now that are non-Asimov stories. So for those who are only reading Asimov stories, there's a large break here. And for those that are reading those, I suspect that some of these are going to be not great stories. I'm basing it on the fact that we've read earlier ones. The Robots in Time. And those were written by William F. Wu. He's written a few other of the novels that are coming up, of the 12 that are coming up, but he didn't write them all. I think he wrote maybe about 4 of the 12 at most, I think. So there's other writers. So fingers crossed there's some, passable writing there and okay writing. I didn't think they were bad, but I think there's a split between people who thought it was really bad writing, and I can understand that. The writing wasn't very good, I admit that. But there are 2 other robot trilogies, and they look interesting. So I have not read those, and I am looking forward to those especially. Until next time, BookTube and Future History Projects readers, I'll see you next time.